Good morning on this Sunday, December 17th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. New polling of Georgia voters shows former President Trump with the advantage right now in a potential matchup with President Biden. According to a media analysis, opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility may fall short on their petition drive to put the issue to voters. And a new audit on Georgia's lucrative tax credit for the film industry shows taxpayers may not be getting their money's worth. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
New polling out by CNN this week, registered voters in Georgia say they prefer former President Donald Trump in a potential matchup over President Biden, 49 to 44%. Now, drill down into these numbers, just 39% of voters polled approve of Biden's job performance, and 54% said Biden's policies have worsened economic conditions. Now, Theron, to you first on these numbers. Still a long way to go until November of next year, but what's the thinking on these numbers in Democratic circles?
Well, if you talk to a lot of Democrats locally and nationally, we all say the same thing, that this upcoming presidential election is going to be very, very close. We never thought that President Joe Biden was just going to blow out whoever his opponent may be. I think most folks think it's going to be Donald Trump. But, you know, Laura, you've heard me say this before. You know, you go back and you look at historically where presidents have been in their reelection. So I'm going to mention three names, you know, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama. What does these three men all have in common? They had low approval ratings from the American people going into their re-elections, and there were some polls that came out showing them either statistically that heat with their opponents are losing. So what I'm very confident about with Joe Biden, and just coming from the White House and just very inspired by his words and the people in the room when I actually took my wife there, is that people are optimistic about the future. I mean, when you hear the numbers and when you hear the job growth, when you hear what he's doing around health care, I talked to a gentleman named Greg Jackson, who's a former employee of mine doing the campaign for Barack Obama, and what he's doing around gun protections, gun safety, you know, creating that office. And if you also look at, you know, Georgia, I mean, everybody wanted to know, hey, we're going to win Georgia. So the numbers are concerning. But I do think that once it becomes a head-to-head matchup, and once independent and moderate voters look at the two, I think, men that are going to probably be their two choices in next November, I think Joe Biden will definitely win re-election.
Well, Phil, according to the CNN poll, Georgia voters approve of the charges that were brought by Fani Willis against former President Trump in Fulton County, 52% to 47%. Almost 50% say a conviction should disqualify him from the presidency.
Well, I don't buy that, and it's a CNN poll. They hate Trump anyway. And going back to Theron's point with those three presidents,
do you not buy the numbers that show him ahead either? Then
you know what? No, actually, I don't. I think that it's a lot closer. I don't think they're polling mythology. If you want to get me involved in polling mythology, I just don't like it. But going back to your point, those three presidents, you cannot compare with an increasingly senile Joe Biden, and the fact that the economy, the open borders, the crime, 5 swing states, we all agree on this panel that 5 states are going to really answer the question as to who's going to win the November election. And yeah, you're concerned. You ought to be concerned as Democrats. And I think that, you know, in Georgia, I think that it's probably 51 to 52%. I think Insider Advantage will probably be doing a polling in January to see that. But I think it's, I think Trump's in good shape.
Melita.
Well, the economic news is promising for the Biden long-term acceptance by the voters. Stock market hit an all-time high this week. The Federal Reserve is predicting possibly 3 interest rate cuts during the next year. November retail sales exceeded expectations. Unemployment is down to 3.7%. It's the best job market in 6 decades. And the United States has had the best COVID recovery in all of the G7 nations. So the Biden presidency has produced a lot of jobs, 7 times higher than the last 3 Republican presidents.
But Melita, let me ask you, are people feeling that? Because when they're going to the grocery stores, when they're filling up their gas tanks, it's hard.
Well, it is hard for people to feel that, yes. And so the Biden administration and the Democratic Party need to develop a better strategy for how to help people understand those numbers and the later impact.
You forgot about wages for the average American. They're down. And I agree with Lori. I think go walk into grocery stores and look at the prices.
But okay, Janelle, let me ask you this, because the independents who were polled said that, if former President Trump is convicted on any of these 91 counts, they're not with him.
Yeah.
So what does that say about the viability of Donald Trump as a candidate for president?
Well, I mean, let's get to that. I'm going to get to that because that's actually part of my points when it comes to the data. But I do have to say that the reason why I think the strategy is not working on the left as it relates to trying to sell us on this idea that Biden has produced this strong economy is because they can't, there's no way to allow us to feel it. You're telling us something that we don't feel. So on the other side of that, when I look at these numbers, I have a little bit of a different take on it. The fact that, and I know, I do agree that polling can be a little tricky, but just looking at this data here, the fact that neither one of these presidents, or former president and the current president, is at 50% is concerning. It should be concerning. The fact that President Biden is showing up at a 39% approval rating, but at the same time, he's polling at 44% against President Trump. That's a 5% difference. And then on the flip side, you have 54% of these voters saying that they think that Biden has worsened the economy, but they're only showing back at 49% in support of Trump. That's another 5%. So that's like a 5% group of people, 5% of people that are saying, I don't want either one of them, really, or I'll pick the other guy as long as it's not this guy.
Or I'll sit out.
Or I'll sit out. And when you have RFK in the mix, and some of RFK's operatives came from the Trump group, the Trump society, you have to consider that. You have to consider that he's polling at 25% with blacks and Hispanics. You have to consider that these names will be on the ballot in most cases. And if that's the case, it's probably going to pull from the Republicans. And that's a concern for me. My issue with our party is that we are throwing all of our eggs into one basket. And in doing that, we're positioning ourselves where if Biden doesn't make it out of the primary for whatever reason, personally, data showing that President Trump probably couldn't beat anyone outside of Biden. That's a huge concern. And as a strategist, not as a Republican, as a strategist, I think we need to pay attention to these numbers and look a little bit more deeper.
All right, let's move on, because there was some surprising news this week from Congressman Drew Ferguson, who announced he will not seek re-election in his 3rd congressional district. Phil, any inside scoop on his decision? And I know lots of folks now jockeying for the chance to represent this district.
Yeah, I called around to some of our congressmen, and they said that he was a big McCarthy supporter, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and that he had a shot maybe to be in the leadership, and now that sadly is gone for him. And so, and a lot of congressmen feel like I've done my service and he's leaving. It's very interesting. I'm talking about a scoop. I, again, was talking to some of the Republicans. That's just for our viewers, that's a very conservative district in West Georgia, and it'll be a Republican seat, so Republicans don't need to worry. But an interesting name should be looked at, and that's Brian Jack. He was the political director in the White House under Donald Trump. And he's a resident of Peachtree City. He has Georgia roots. He could raise a lot of money. He would get the Trump endorsement. And of course, that's Trump country in that district. Now, there's some state legislators that might want to look at it. There will be a Republican primary, but keep an eye on Brian Jack.
Well, you mentioned Brian Jack's name on here before, and I think Janelle vouches for him too. So I've never met this gentleman.
You need to.
But I'd like to know him. But one thing that I think on the flip side, look, I've only had a couple times to meet Congressman Ferguson, and I knew a lot of his staff. Bobby Cipro was one of his former chiefs of staff. And what's going to happen now with him deciding not to run for re-election, this is going to be a huge sort of leadership void for the Republicans. I mean, this is a congressman who served on a very powerful Ways and Means Committee, and had aspirations. But I think you're right, Phil. What I heard from some of my sources is that definitely he was very close to former Speaker McCarthy, but also he just thinks that Washington is dysfunctional and it's time to come home and just do something else.
All right, one more topic before we go to break. Jurors deciding whether Rudy Giuliani should pay millions of dollars to the former Fulton County elections workers who said his false claims destroyed their lives and their reputations. Melita, there was a lot of emotional testimony this week.
There was, and it really is horrible to hear the impact of Rudy Giuliani's lies on these two women, because his lies gave permission, so to speak, for people to really harass these women and make their lives very, very difficult. And the sad thing about all of this is that no matter what the jury may award, they'll have a very difficult time collecting, because Rudy Giuliani is having trouble paying his legal bills and many other creditors. So it's really sad for these women to relive the horrors of the aftermath of the lies, and then to know that they might not ever see a dime of that money.
And Janelle, Rudy Giuliani's attorney even said, hey, we know there was damage done, but it's not in the millions.
Yeah, you know, you put yourself in a hard position when you choose emotions over logic, you know, when you choose to harass. I mean, harassing anybody for any reason, under any circumstance, is going to lead to this type of position. You know, you don't really get to dictate how much damage you've caused if you're operating in emotion. So we got to step out of that. I need us to really step back and start looking at things from a logic perspective. You lose sight of the point you're trying to make, and it gets overshadowed by this when you start harassing people.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to remind our viewers, I mean, this is a very dark time for Georgia. And thank you, Janelle, for speaking out about the harassment. Yeah. Because remember, Rudy Giuliani came to Georgia, went to that state capitol, those state hearings, and basically put this video out and tried to destroy Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss's lives forever. And not only did he sort of, you know, say he produced evidence, he doubled down on it. So we just got to call it for what it was. But thank you for speaking out on it. And I think he should definitely play them whatever they deserve.
Just very quickly, I would say that you got to be very careful with the defamation suit. I think Rudy Giuliani went above and beyond, but you do have a right to be wrong in this country, and he was an attorney, and he was arguing for his client, and I think that's very tricky, and obviously the jury's not going to be very sympathetic to a Republican.
And, well, these Fulton County elections workers were not public figures, so anyway. All right, coming up, a media analysis of signatures collected by opponents of the Atlanta police training facility shows some of those signatures may not be legit. We'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
As the court battle rages on over the Atlanta police training facility, some members of the media started looking into the more than 116,000 signatures collected by opponents who are hoping to get the issue on the ballot for voters to decide. The Associated Press did an analysis on a sample of the signatures and found questionable addresses, and that some non-Atlanta residents signed the petitions. Now, this was no means an official count by Melita, but Melita, you're not by Melita. Y'all are chit-chatting away and distracting me over here.
Sorry.
No official count by the city or anyone, but Melita, what do you think about these findings?
Well, I think they're very interesting, and if the city clerk had been upfront about how they were going to analyze the signatures from the get-go, we might have a better way for the press to analyze these figures. But you have to have access to the voter registration files, which the news media did not have when they were considering this analysis. So I think it's concerning for those who gathered the signatures, and the sooner we have closure on whether there were enough signatures, whether the signatures are valid, then the better relationships will be between the city and those who are opposed to the facility, for maybe coming to some conclusion that can be more acceptable.
Janelle?
Yeah, and I apologize for that. We're kind of chit-chatting about this because I'm trying to find the ways to keep saying the same thing over and over again. But I think with this, obviously we got to wait, we got to let it, see what happens and all that. But it's just, I find it really hard to find honesty in people who are throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers, right? Like, to try to find the integrity in these people. It's just like, how is anyone surprised that they came up with these names out of nowhere? I mean, how can we really be surprised? Like, this is, to me, it's just baffling that we're even debating this, right? Let's just let it play out, show that the names were fake, and then we can just move on, right? That's kind of where I am at this point. The whole idea of forcing outcomes is something that we're doing these days that I don't think we should do. You need to present your side, and if people don't want it, then they just don't want it. And we got to be able to move on, or at least be able to present our argument in a way where people can want it.
All right, we'll move on then. Well said. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger wants almost $5 million to help appease some critics of Georgia's voting machines. Now, he wants to buy devices that will allow voters to verify the QR codes printed out on our ballots actually match our choices. Phil, You've been critical of these machines and those QR codes. Would this help?
You are correct. I don't like those QR codes, but I will say this, and I'm not that much of an expert on the technology, but okay, let's do that. If he's going to do that and spend $5 million+ for every precinct in Georgia, why is he saying we don't have enough time and the money to do the patches that we've been talking about? I pointed out that, you know, if my phone has malware in it, it ought to be patched, or you can get all the private banking, whatever information. Why don't we do that with our systems here? Now, we have a federal court judge. In fact, Melita and I have been talking about the case in January with Judge Amy Totenberg. She has attacked the QR. She has attacked the fact that nothing's being done, with 29 cyber experts saying that we have gaps in our system. And so I don't understand why Raffensperger is not saying, okay, let's do the patches along with the QR readers.
Darren.
You know, Lori, and I forgot to do this, but you remember I called you, and we have some fans that work at the Buckhead Library for early voting. So shout out to you all. I didn't recognize y'all as winners, but you guys are big fans of the show. But the thing is that when you go and vote, right, you're meted with these great smiles and people saying, hey, give your information to verify you. And then you go vote, and then you have a piece of paper. The QR code thing to me is that I kind of mixed reaction, right? Because I do think the Secretary of State is trying to sort of say, all right, let's give you an extra layer of comfort and trust that your vote is actually being counted properly. But Phil makes a good point. It's you know, anytime you start injecting technology and codes and everything, you got to make sure that the people really feel comfortable about it. So what I would encourage the Secretary of State to do is, again, work with the local election officers, make sure that people can come and test them, make sure you do some research and everything, because ultimately, look, we're going to have a big election here next year, and we got to get it right, because if we don't, we're going to have another lawyer possibly coming down here talking about election workers and what they did or did not do when it came to voting.
Melita?
Well, this $5 million is going to be spent on equipment that doesn't even exist yet and software that hasn't been written. And so the futility of putting yet another screen between the voter and the result is really ridiculous. I mean, when you talk about technology and the idea that you can develop this system which does not exist between now and the election cycle, which begins with a presidential preference primary in March, is pretty ludicrous.
Janelle?
In 2020, President Trump won on the machines. In 2020, Senator Perdue beat Ossoff on the machines. Where they lost was with the absentee ballots. When those numbers started coming in, that's what we saw changing everything. I know people who lost by the exact number of absentee ballots that was in that area. Not that I don't think that we have to look into the machines, not that I don't think that there's something, you know, because there may be. But I am a little confused around why we are pushing for paper ballots when we lost on paper ballots. I am a little confused about the machines. Do we know the difference between the software and the hardware? Like, there's just some things that I'm just a little confused on around this topic.
There was a breach, though. There was a breach into the system, though.
Yeah, well,
I'm
not disputing the breach. You know what I mean? I don't want you to feel like I'm attacking you or your position, because all I'm stating is that the facts show that where we saw the numbers change was with the absentee ballot.
Oh, I agree with that.
So the point I'm making is I want you to fight the machines. I will focus on, I want to get rid of the drop boxes. I want to kind of focus in on some of our policy around absentee ballots.
He just needs, the Secretary of State's got to have more training. I mean, Melita makes some really good points, and Phil and Janelle as well, but this is a point for him to take. And look, let's not get this twisted. This guy is a possible candidate for governor, and I don't want the governor to think I'm trying to push him out of office, but he is on the list, right? And so if he gets this right or wrong, this could really dictate his political future in this state going forward.
I would agree with that.
Good points, everybody. Yeah. Up next, a new state audit shows supporters of Georgia's film tax credit may be exaggerating when it comes to the numbers of jobs it creates.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The AJC reports a new state audit shows Georgia's film tax credit creates far fewer jobs than its supporters claim. The audit reveals the return on investment is fairly low. Theron lawmakers are not talking about doing away with it, but there is talk about possibly a cap.
I don't think you can do away with it, right? And you're right, that is not an option. What the debate is over is, we are feeling it because how many people do we know that actually have been able to work in the film industry? And this credit, which was designated particularly to bring business to Georgia, to give producers, directors, actors, actresses an opportunity to come and film here, I think has generated a tremendous amount of wealth. And also I think that in jobs as well. I mean, we're talking about upwards of 60,000, new jobs just in the film industry. But this audit is concerning because it kind of gets into the details. And so I think what you're going to see the proponents of the tax credit come back and say, look, these are actually, humanization cases where people have actually been able to provide for their families in this film industry. And then two, if we're going to continue to be the #1 state to do business, this film tax credit is a big part of that.
Right, and you got to think about the other folks too, caterers and makeup artists. Everybody, there's a domino effect in this industry too.
That's a group, and that's where I was going to go to. To your point, the 60,000 jobs, the $3.5 billion in wages to Georgia families, and this information is coming from the Georgia Screen Entertainment Coalition, their data points. But that being said, there is another angle to this. Whenever a film pops up and it has a landmark, a restaurant that's from Georgia,
or
that
the
brings
the peach.
It brings in tourism, right? You're bringing in new actors. I don't know how I feel about all that, but I will say that you are bringing a lot of people from LA. But either way, but keep your politics there. But then, to your point, the local businesses that get to benefit from it as well. So I think we should keep the credit, but maybe discuss some of the stipulations on it.
Phil.
Well, I would just add too, the Georgia Department of Revenue has actually tightened up the regulations as to what actually qualifies for a credit, and I think I'm glad they did that. That was a good reform. I think we need to keep auditing it, but it did create a great industry for the state.
Yeah.
Melita.
Well, for the Republicans who are concerned about how those in the film industry might vote, I have only 4 words: Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
All right, well, there is a tax credit available to Georgians that is in need of more participants. The foster care tax credit allows Georgia taxpayers to donate their state tax dollars to help kids who have aged out of foster care with things like money for college or technical school, food, or rent. Phil, I've worked on this issue. It costs taxpayers nothing, but so far, only about $4 million of the $20 million allowed has been donated.
Well, that's right, and I know you have worked on it, and I think this should be a bipartisan issue. I mean, this has been an issue that should have been addressed before, and now it finally is, so this is good.
Melita.
Well, this is a great program, and I personally know about in North Carolina when my daughter and son-in-law were foster parents at a children's home, the great problems that children who age out of the system have when they're trying to take the lessons they've learned in foster care and become productive adults in college with furthering their education. So this is a great program, and I hope that more donations will come in.
All right, Theron.
No, I think the concept behind this program is fantastic, and it's really a simple fix. Just put it in place permanently. Let's figure out a way that the state, and you got to depend on individuals too to give their tax money towards it as well. But I think it's a great program. I think it should be permanently fully funded.
All right, well, almost 24 books are being banned and pulled from the Marietta City Schools Reading Center. The decision came down Tuesday night in a 6-1 vote. Superintendent Grant Rivera said he was surprised by what was in the Reading Center. Melita, was this move justified?
I haven't read all of these books, but I am not a fan of book bans in general, particularly when there are so many banned at once and we don't know why they were banned. And I think one of the effects of book bans sometimes is the high school kids circulate the list and then they all go check the books out from somewhere else or buy the books and swap them around. So they may have unintended consequences by banning these books.
All right.
There's nothing wrong with a school board trying to review what is good material for these students. I've talked to some of the board members. Some of this stuff is garbage. This is 23 books out of 23,000 books that they're looking at. I got a 6-year-old granddaughter. I don't want her looking at some of this stuff.
I got to wrap it for winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Janelle, we'll start with you this week. You brought some props.
I did. So as the holidays are approaching, here's some stocking stuffers. So there is a restaurant. I had to bring the bag. The bag is empty because I ate all the chocolate. But it's called Southern Treats of Thomasville, Georgia. Please go check them out if you're in that area. It's the best pecans, chocolate, everything, okay? And then next I have a book by Dr. Patricia Anderson that I would love to recommend. It's called You Know Less less than you don't know. And it's basically talking about transformational leadership, but it's leadership not just in the corporate world, but in your family. So I recommend that book. And lastly, happy birthday to the fabulous Gwen Jones, who is the mother of one of my good friends, and her birthday is today.
Nice, happy birthday, Theron.
I wanted to start off by just making the White House a winner. I had a chance to go to the Christmas party this year. It was fantastic. Shout out to Steve Benjamin, who runs public engagement there. And also I want to make Tom Fanning a winner. He's retiring, former CEO of Southern Company. Also, Chris Womack is coming in, and just thank him for his work leading this industry around, reliable energy, making sure that people understand that, we need power at a time where we're growing with electric vehicles. Everything is carbon. We got to make sure that we congratulate him for his legacy.
Phil.
Yes, and I would just pile onto that. Congratulations to Chris Womack for succeeding him, and also with Plant Vogtle being a keystone of our energy. It's a model for the country, in fact, for the world, and we're going to have 80 years of reliability. I have a winner, Jaylene Hunter. Some of you may know her. She was involved in state government. She's now the new executive director of the Georgia Press Association. She's taking over from Robin Rhodes, who's also a winner. And my loser is President Biden. He says he stands for Israel, and yet his administration, his Secretary of State, keeps stabbing Israel in the back, demanding ceasefires. I don't get it. It's a dysfunctional foreign policy. I think he's going to lose some Jewish votes.
Melita?
Well, I think it was a winning situation for all of the high school teams in the state championship to return to the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the first time since 2018. Rabbi Peter Berg is a winner for the beautiful prayer he delivered in front of the United States Senate as the first Georgia rabbi to be there as Senate chaplain since 1966. And then condolences to the family of Kiana Jones.
All right, see y'all next week.